Welcome, Hilary. Great to see you. Great to have you participate in our Leaders Who Care series.
Mark, it's lovely to see you. What a wonderful way to wrap up the week. Thank you for having me.
No, my pleasure. And I have to say it, my pleasure, and then we'll just go on from there. Would you be kind enough to formally introduce yourself and what you do?
Absolutely. So my name is Hilary Black, and I am the founder of the very first medical cannabis organization in Canada, the Compassion Club, in 1997. Fast forward a few decades, and I am the Chief Advocacy Officer of Canopy Growth, which is the largest legal cannabis company in the world. As Chief Advocacy Officer, my mandate includes social purpose, diversity and inclusion, social justice, and patient advocacy.
So to me, that's absolutely fascinating, a lot because of what I do and what I care about, and for what's going on in the world right now. We all talk about our why and our purpose, but I like to ask it a different way. Why do you do what you do?
2 words: compassion and justice. So the compassion side of my work around cannabis is we know that cannabis can be an incredibly effective medicine for many people suffering with a lot of different kinds of ailments. I have seen now in my life thousands of patients have their lives transformed by having access to medical cannabis and education around it. And that's the compassion piece. The justice piece is cannabis prohibition is deeply rooted in racism. Cannabis prohibition, I believe, is one of, and really the whole war on drugs, is one of the cornerstones of how systemic racism is built into our justice system. So when I was 18, I had these realizations about how I could maybe help make the world a better place by working to free cannabis around the whole world, and really focused on the health issues and focused on the justice side.
Yeah, that's amazing, and it's so relatable, so hitting a point in time that's so relevant in so many ways. It's taken decades for leaders in corporate, leaders in government to realize that aligning with social impact in one way or another is not only good for a community, but it's actually good for their business as well. And it's good for attracting talent because really good people want to go work with leaders who care about this type of stuff. You've been involved in all that locally, globally. It's a little bit of a push question because it's asking you about you, but what differentiates you, do you think, as one of the leaders who care?
Well, I think it's unusual to have a member of a C-suite that comes from a criminal background. I mean, I am lucky that I haven't ended up with a criminal record, but I was engaged in civil disobedience for almost 20 years. So coming from building a nonprofit organization and actively breaking the law openly every day and really being willing to risk arrest and talking about medical cannabis and cannabis justice long before it was a popular conversation in Canada, I think that it gives me a little bit of differentiation in my current workplace. And no, I also didn't come into working with Canopy with any corporate experience. I didn't have any experience working in the business world. I didn't have any experience working in a hierarchy. I had worked in a very left-wing, consensus-based, civilly disobedient medical cannabis organization. We also built an incredible wellness center where we use the profits of the cannabis distribution to provide access to all kinds of other healthcare services. So we kind of joke that it was like from the courtroom to the boardroom. And, I think as our corporate worlds evolve, I think we'll see the value more and more of bringing lived experience into positions of power in companies. I work with people who can teach me about how to speak corporate finance and can teach me about the filings and can teach me, the things that they have learned in their business school and in their backgrounds. And in turn, I get to share my insights and my experience. And together, I think we make some pretty high quality decisions.
See, I'm so great to hear that. Well, 2 things I wanted to ask is, did you ever get the question early on, do your parents know what you're doing?
It was challenging for my parents in the beginning, also because I built the Compassion Club instead of going to university. And I was a good student, and I had taken a year off to decide if I was going into law or medicine, which in itself speaks to my privilege. If you graduate from high school and you're trying to decide if you're going into law or medicine, this is like, you know, a privileged place to be starting from. So I think they were kind of waiting for me to get over it and get back to school and kind of get my life back on track. And that was only in the very beginning, you know, as the Compassion Club really created traction and started having meaningful conversations with government at all levels and working with hundreds and hundreds and then thousands and thousands of, you know, people living with critical and chronically, people who are critically and chronically ill, palliative patients. And the media started really warming up. You know, as a Canadian, you will know how much we love and respect David Suzuki and the nature of things. So David Suzuki and the Nature of Things did a piece on medical cannabis and on my Compassion Club in the I think it was like 1999 maybe. And that was a real turning point for the country, but also for my parents.
It's interesting you mentioned David, because a good friend of mine is John Ruffalo. I don't know if you know him. He's the founder of Omer's Ventures, who's left. He was a Deloitte partner, very involved in innovation and whatnot. And he's worked very closely with David, has been an influencer in him. Definitely would be a good introduction for you.
I would love that. Thank you.
To meet with him. The other thing I love that you said is, because we work very much like this, the world's changed. We talk about experiences rather than years of experience or specifically what college you went to, because the world has changed and is going to change a lot more, I think, in that respect, as to, like you said, going from the courtroom to the boardroom. It's like putting a sports team together. You put the right fit together to make up a team. So I'm really glad you shared that. Talking about family, my grandparents were from Kiev, and they always used to say, and I'm sure maybe yours did too, with a little Kiev accent, as long as you got your health, that's the most important thing. And then they said, and then education. But with technology changing like crazy, with people's thought mindsets changing like crazy, and COVID giving people a lot more time to think about what's going on, how do you view the future, specifically what you're bringing to the table for well-being and everything? How do you view the future and how everybody will be more aware in the workplace, at home, and in the community?
Well, I mean, externally in my industry, one thing we've seen is people are consuming a lot more cannabis during COVID. And I'm not sure if it's just that they have more time at home, but I think it's also perhaps helping people to manage some of the anxiety or the depression that can come from separation. I mean, I think one of the blessings is our professional relationships have become more intimate and have become more personal, right? So through our experience of having video calls from our home, you have your children or your neighbor or your dog popping in, and you get to see the inside of somebody's home. But also we have been spending more time just taking care of each other. You know, like in the first few weeks of COVID, when everybody was adjusting and it was all very alarming, I was meeting with my team daily, and most of our conversations were about what's happening for your parents in Italy. How are you managing to get your groceries? You know, some people in my team live alone in condos in downtown Toronto, and their experience is very different from somebody who lives with a family in a rural setting. And I have colleagues that live all over the world. So acknowledging that it was valuable company time to spend taking care of one another, checking on physical health, sharing recipes, sharing tips for how we're getting our workouts at home, and more tears, honestly. Mm-hmm. You know, I think that we have more room for empathy, and also as a leader, I find there's more room for vulnerability, right? I'm able to also share what I'm worried about, or if I'm upset that day, rather than needing to, well, I'm never a stoic leader. I'm a crier, but I think a real increase in both empathy and vulnerability.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And you know, we're dealing with a lot of mental health issues right now for all the obvious reasons: COVID, racial, you know, pandemic, you name it. Working remote, is that going to stay like that? I think, I love your viewpoint on this. Business leaders are going to be ones that are going to be playing a much bigger role in the financial wellness of their people, the physical wellness of their people, and the mental wellness of their
Yeah.
people. But it also relates to a lot of, we're calling them vintage now, by the way. They're not senior or old or ancient. We call everybody vintage now. But even a lot of people that are getting up in age that maybe are, older, but we're taught, oh my God, cannabis and all this stuff, but are realizing maybe it's good for their well-being too, and maybe in mental health, it's good for your well-being. Are you finding that the business leaders can play a part in including that in people's well-being?
Yeah, well, certainly. I mean, in Canada, because now we have a legalization of cannabis, both medically and recreationally, companies have the option of including cannabis and medical cannabis in health spending accounts, along with your ability to, see a massage therapist or to see a chiropractor.
Mm-hmm.
And that, is something that I hope that we get to for the United States,
No kidding.
sooner than later. But certainly, even from the, very top of the house with our leadership, there's a lot more conversations about how are you? How's your stress levels this week? Please don't work this weekend, even though we know that there's all kinds of things piling up. And that's good to see. We were having a conversation yesterday about the amount of people in our company, including myself, that didn't take their holiday time last year, and how important it is, even when work feels like a tsunami, that we have to take those rests.
Well, technology, even way back when it was just computers, everybody was promised that this is going to help us have more time to do what we're going to do. And it seems like we're always on, which is,
Yeah.
if you love what you do, then it makes it a lot easier. With respect to Canopy and your leadership in the world, the industry and the industry is looking for leaders like Canopy to have integrity, to be able to present the quality products, to be able to make this, if you will, it is already an industry people can respect and use. I mean, not to make a speech here, but there's always been more medical things cannabis can do than liquor, for example, and whatever. So I just love you to share a little bit about what do you and your colleagues at Canopy see as your desire and your role in playing that leadership role for cannabis in general in the world.
Well, I'm going to tell you a story because I think that this is really kind of what you're getting at. So this to me speaks to the connection between a personal experience that an employee has and a company's response. And it also, to me, this is about the increasing role of corporations to play a significant to be a significant leader around resolving some of the complex issues that our society is facing. So just over 3 years ago, my best friend's 18-year-old daughter died of a fentanyl overdose. So she was one of the victims of the opioid overdose epidemic that is sweeping both Canada and the US. And she's 18 years old, Gemma. And I took some time off to take care of the family. And I moved in and just did my best to carry them through this really terrible time. And when I came back to work, my CEO at the time said, "Well, Hilary, what do we want to do? How can we contribute? How can we do something that's going to have a systemic impact on the opioid overdose epidemic? Because the crisis needs more funding. There's so much stigma around it. And at this point, we've had hundreds and hundreds of people reporting to us that cannabis is one of the tools that's helping them out of addiction, whether it's somebody that's addicted to their pain medicines or it's somebody who has ended up on the streets addicted to, intravenous substance use. At that time, I believe Sanjay Gupta had already come out with his episode about, how cannabis can help to be a tool out of addiction. But what we really needed was evidence. You need a body of clinical evidence in order for healthcare professionals around the world to understand that cannabis is not a gateway into addiction. Cannabis can actually be a tool to help you find the gate out of addiction. So we invested $2.5 million. The government of British Columbia, the Department of Mental Health and Addiction, contributed an additional $500,000, and we created an endowment at the University of British Columbia to support the world's first ever professorship of cannabis science. And that professor, an amazing man, Dr. M.J. Malloy, there's a leader who cares. If you want to talk to somebody who's in the heart of the overdose epidemic, I highly recommend talking to M.J. Malloy. But he is running clinical trials with people who are addicted to street level opiates and introducing cannabis into their treatment regimes to start building a body of clinical data around what we see in practice is happening with people in their lives in terms of cannabis being a tool out of addiction. And that I was incredibly proud of my company for stepping up in that way in terms of addressing in a significant manner an issue that our country was suffering in, but also responding to a very deeply personal tragedy for me.
Mm-hmm. That's beautiful, actually. That's almost what you would think is supposed to happen. And but the steps were taken. Sometimes the steps aren't taken to happen. So I really appreciate you sharing that. And there's just so much opportunity, I think, for corporate leaders who care to do something like that. So if you could make one dramatic change, another unfair question maybe, if you could make one dramatic change right now that you were granted to make, what would it be?
Like from a corporate perspective, I think that we're moving more and more towards metrics other than our financials being key things for us to need to report on, right? So, we have ESG where there is, a metric that companies can report on their environmental and social and governance. But I really would like to see that escalate. I'd like to see it really to become a requirement for companies to report on their diversity and inclusion and to report on their social purpose investments. And this to not just become something that companies do because they choose to, but more and more, I'd like to see it built into how we actually value publicly traded companies.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that because I had one executive tell me that, I really do care, he tells me, and the problem is I'm constantly worrying about my quarterly financial results the minute I'm finished the last quarterly financial results and the shareholders and everything. And he said, I know that's no excuse, but I just end up telling somebody, just give a $10,000 donation. And he doesn't want to do that. And so I think we're heading towards there, and I will tell you, in our experience, talent, being able to attract talent may be the thing that keeps doing that, because people want to go join companies that are doing stuff like that and revealing it. So that's a good dramatic change. I'll sign that petition any day. So last question on this. I'm a graduate, didn't have my graduation, couldn't get my girlfriend to the prom, really ticked off. About to go have some cannabis because I'm ticked off. And I don't know what to do. So when I come up to you and said, oh, that's happening, what now? What next?
Well, what's next for the next generation in an environment of COVID is a complex question that I don't actually have a very clear answer for. But I think that it's a time when our values are more and more important. And I think that as young people are choosing a career path and looking at companies that perhaps they want to work with, not just looking at what's the economic benefit going to be for me, but is this a company who cares? Does this company have a track record of doing good in the world? Is this going to be an environment where I can use my voice and be heard and be able to implement change inside the company that's going to affect the world?
Well, I think you just finalized that you are one of the leaders who care from way back when even. So it's been a delight to speak with you. It's been lovely, I've been wanting to say that.
You know what? I'd love to add one thought to that. If I was sharing advice for kind of the next generation, because I think it's really incredibly important to know your history, to understand the history of the civil rights movement, to understand the history of Pride and LGBTQ, to understand the history of the Black Lives Matter movement, and to really be informed in order to be a passionate and unwavering ally, and to recognize what privilege is, to understand your own privilege and be able to use those privileges, being willing to risk things in your life in order to address injustices and to stick to your values.
Well said. And you know what? You're probably going to have a much more fulfilling life beyond what you think you could have had for doing that. Thank you.
It was absolutely my pleasure. Thank you so much for the chat, Mark. I hope we can do it again sometime.